Ben from Gallery Nucleus. I'm here today with Daniel Snaddon, Max Lang, and Sara Scrimgeour to talk a bit about the wonderful short film, The Snail and the Whale. You've probably seen some of their other films, which I'm a fan of. Films like The Room on the Broom, Azog, Revolting Rhymes, Gruffalo, and others. We're going to begin with Max, who will be showing us some development art from the film. And yeah, take it away, Max.
Hi. Yeah, so the origins of The Snail and the Whale were that we had started working on the Gruffalo in 2008. It's a long time ago now. But that's how I came first across the book. And maybe, Dan, can you bring up the keynote and we can share the cover already? And it's been one of my favorite picture books since I first came across it, and I really, really loved it. And I was always hoping we could actually adapt it into a short, not long after the Gruffalo, but it turned out to be quite challenging, not only like story-wise, but also the technology was not there. So it became one of these dreams that I was chasing, and it was only almost 10 years after I first came across the book that I met Dan and came across the team at Triggerfish, and where it suddenly became a bit more realistic. Technology had caught up, and over these years, me and my wife, Suzanne, had been writing on the script and trying out different things and trying to figure out how we could establish a relationship between two characters that are so different in size and don't hardly fit into the same screen, without adding a lot of dialogue and staying true to the original rhyme and the poem of the book, which is just beautiful. And
Max, when you said the technology, I'm imagining a lot of water being the challenge.
Yes. Yes.
Is that the primary difficulty with the technology?
That was definitely part of it. Also the scope of the world, the amount of characters, the sets that we had to build. I mean, just to put it in perspective, when we started on the Gruffalo, there were like 7 characters that we really were working with. And we had a couple of water shots in there, and those water shots took us all the production time. And it was really, really hard to get them to work. So we always knew that the water would be a big, big part of this story. It's part and we treat it as a story element where we have all kinds of water depending on what the mood of the scene is. And we knew that we had to get that right for the story to work. So it was always one of these very daunting tasks that kind of I'm not sure if we can do this yet. And actually, even when we started the film, most of us felt like, well, we're not sure if we can actually do this because we looked at how long it took to produce any of these shots before, and was like, oh, now almost every shot has water in it, and it has to look really, really great.
Yeah, you keep saying that on paper it just looked impossible, right? It sort of felt like the numbers weren't quite adding up.
No, no, it was really not. And I feel like that's a good point to lead to Sara, because we really had to come up with some magic recipe to make it all work. And in the past, a lot of our art directors had come from a design background. And Sara, being really multi-talented, had so far mostly worked in compositing and being a compositing lead on the other films. And that's not necessarily a trajectory that brings you to art director. But over these past films, we also always come across this thing that in compositing, you can change a lot of things, but you also have to fix a lot of problems. And you really have to know the full potential of what you can do at the end of the film and what is hard to do. So, and that's why we approached Sara to be our art director, because she has all the knowledge and she knows all the things that have to go into making the final picture, and knows all the ripple effects and all the things. Yeah, we can leave this for down the road, or we have to fix this now. And so we really brought Sara in from the first meetings, I think, at Triggerfish, to be involved from the start and become kind of our partner in crime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So we start. I mean, maybe it's good to just start clicking through these images. And
Yeah.
start talking.
Okay, I can ask another question. I have I was curious about the length. You mentioned this book being challenging as opposed to the Gruffalo. I mean, in terms of the length of the story and adapting the story, was this? I haven't read the Gruffalo, the actual book. Was that was this Snail in the Whale much longer than the Gruffalo, or
No,
was the
actually,
adaptation harder in some way?
no, actually, adaptation-wise, the Gruffalo was challenging too because it was our first one, and all these books take about 7 minutes to read, and we always want to expand the story to something more closer to half an hour. And in addition, we don't want to add a lot of dialogue to the original rhyme by Julia Donaldson. Once, because they are beautiful poems, these books, but also they are known like by all the kids in the UK by heart. You can maybe compare it to like a Dr. Seuss book in the States. So we really didn't want to add lots of banter or other dialogue. And
I think that's great that you stayed so true to it. I mean, I did read The Snail and the Whale, and I felt that after watching the film, I felt it was very natural the way you guys kept it. Like even the silent moments, it really kind of let it have its sort of own beauty, but still sort of expanding on the story.
yes,
Well, that's lovely to hear, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we always try to just add to it and not change it, right? Like that's kind of the recipe we're going by. We want to expand the world. We want to add little character moments between the lines that are not in the text, but that don't contradict the actual book. So we want to stay very true to the source. And I feel like the main challenge really was when you compare it to the Gruffalo. The Gruffalo, the text is a bit more conversational and the characters are talking more to each other. And even though it's a mouse and a big beast, the size difference is not as extreme. They have hands, they're a bit more anthropomorphic. They can do more pantomime, which is here. As soon as you show the whale in full frame, you hardly can see the snail. And when you show the snail, the whale is condensed to one big eye, pretty much. And so the big challenge was always like, well, but how can we get these characters to interact and relate to each other? Because one of the key things next to the environmental theme is the friendship between these two characters.
That's one of the questions I had too, was in terms of scale, I wonder, I read somewhere that you know, having the whale's eye look toward the snail was one thing, and you can sort of, using editing, sort of, you know, make them believe that they're sort of looking at each other. But were there scenes where you cheated the scale, you know, making the snail bigger or smaller, or because I didn't notice.
I think
Yes,
there
and
were
great.
I think there were about 3 different scales of snail. I think in total there was like a 100% size snail. There was a 150 and like a 200. Is that right, Dan?
Yes, I actually have a slide for this. So,
there we go.
Well, let's go to that.
so this is like the first page of the book, or the first 2 pages of the book, more or less, and it introduces the world of the snail, this dock, and then the snail herself. So when we were looking at Snail and her design, there was is it on these slides or is it a little bit later with the whale? But
Might be on the whale.
I think it might be on the whale one. Let me have a look. I'm just gonna go because it's an interesting to kind of see. Yes,
Yeah,
here
that's
we go.
the one.
So if you have a look here, we kind of anticipated that we would need a normal size snail all the way up to a twice as big snail for certain shots, just so that it I mean, even just putting them in 2D here on the map. I mean, these are your sketches, right, Max?
Well, some of it, yeah, these are my sketches, and then the illustrations of the book, and then some illustrations and characters from all other films. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dan Clark, our production designer, you're going to see a ton of his work in these. But yes, I think basically we knew from the get-go that that cheating the scale a little bit was going to be 100% necessary.
And it's one of these things, like in illustrations, you do that all the time, like because you work for the page, and then like Axel Scheffler, like cheats the scale of the snail and the whale all the time, constantly. So you also can't just take the illustrations and literally go by that, and it's like, oh, the whale is going to be this size and the snail is going to be that size. As soon as you bring people into this, it all changes everything. Because the snail might look cute and appealing on 200% when she's sitting on the whale's tail. But as soon as you put that snail into a kid's hand or next to someone's face, it's almost the size of their head. So, and that becomes a completely different image. And that was one of the main reasons why we knew, like, oh, we'll definitely need a small scale snail that interacts with the people. Because if you would make the people big enough to hold a 200% snail, they would look huge against the whale, and the whale wouldn't be big anymore. So there was a lot of this kind of weighing our options, and ultimately we really choose an approach similar to illustrations, where we kind of go by it shot by shot. You know, how does it look in this shot? Well, the snail needs to be a bit bigger. We can't see her at all. Well, oh, this snail looks bizarre on this table next to the teacher. We have to scale her down. And
in South Africa, we do have snails that big, and they're not no one keeps them as pets or anything like that. They're kind of horrifying.
Yeah, but on that point, I mean, we also ended up having to have a separate tail model for the whale of the tail, because we needed one that was a lot more high detail, so that for the close-up shots of the snail, we weren't working with this extremely heavy, high detailed whale model sort of attached to outside of the frame, and so for the wider shots, then we'd go for our normal whale, who was a little bit less detailed but worked perfectly for the wides.
Now, one thing that I find interesting is in the production, the visual development side of it, like, I know playing with water, you had to you guys wanted to make the water more realistic, but when you develop characters and determine how cartoony they are, I mean, I know you guys have stayed fairly true to the illustrations within the book, but in terms of the level of detail, or even like the ridges on the whales, like near the mouth area, how do you determine how do you unify it all and determine like what's too cartoony or what's too realistic?
It's a really great question. And I think that it's something, that it would be a very daunting question for us to answer as a team had we not had the experience of the other films. And I know this because when we took over from Studio Soy at Triggerfish on the specials, we went from a kind of Studio Soy's approach was a hybrid approach of sort of using model build sets and CG characters. And we, again, on that film, because the scale of the film was so big, we couldn't make that model work. We had to go full CGI, but we wanted to retain the model built look in everything that we did. So that question of well, what do you make look realistic and what do you make look a bit pushed or caricatured or cartoony? It was a really tricky question for us to answer. And what we discovered is in CGI, to get that model built sort of stop motion look, it takes an enormous amount of thought and consideration, because you almost have to approach everything from the perspective of, if we had to build this as a model, how would we build it, and then what would that look like, and then what would be the giveaway that it's a model, you know. And so it comes down to a lot of scale relationships between materials and objects, and there are these like these little kind of giveaways that kind of make something look a bit small. In terms of the characters, though, I mean, you two just jump in at any moment, but like Sara was saying, there's almost like a sense that with Whale, he's almost a character and a set. So there's the character version, which has the you know, has less going on, but then the set version where you get up close and there's a lot going on. But I think that the idea is always to try to keep their shape language quite simple and appealing, right? Like and I think that in terms of the cartooniness, you know, there are lots of really nice references of really cool animation of snails and ways that snails are being pushed in some shows. But we found that for our show and for our story, we wanted to kind of keep the characters feeling very I don't want to say naturalistic, because they're talking and they're, you know, doing things that they wouldn't normally do, but you wanted to feel that there was real jeopardy, and that there was a real kind of sort of, I mean, it's in the text that she's small and frail, so there's a fragility, there's a vulnerability for her, and so we didn't want to do too much squash and stretch, because if she can squash and stretch too much, then, you know, she could maybe survive anything, and, you know, she could be like Wile E. Coyote, fall off a cliff and
That's interesting.
bounce back up, you know.
And I think that's kind of that. The same goes for sort of the decision to go for a more naturalistic approach with the water, because, you know, I think the water in this film really needed to sell the story. And had we sort of chosen to go for something a little bit more stylized or a little bit more cartoony with the story, you know, I think the idea was that the whale felt big and the snail smelt. The snail didn't smell, don't worry. The snail felt small, you know, and if we went for something a little bit too stylized or cartoony with the water, I think that would have been quite a giveaway, you know. It wouldn't have had the magnitude or the expansiveness that we feel in the story.
I think that's a really interesting point about when we think of cartooniness, like what makes it cartooniness, what makes it cartoony, other than like the caricature of the characters. You mentioned, you know, squash and stretch, and I find that a really interesting point about, you know, showing the fragility of the characters, because the film that comes to mind is like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs or something, you know, where the animation and the fluidity of things says so much about it. And it's almost like the medium is the message, where by not having it so squashy and stretchy and so animated, it does feel more grounded in a way, you know, even though the characters themselves still look like cartoons. I've never been able to really sort of verbalize that, I think. So that's a very interesting point about the physics being, you know, being part of the storytelling.
That's cool. Yeah, it's something that's fascinating, right, to think about, and it's something that kind of drove our animators a little bit crazy in the beginning, because they like moving stuff around, they like really pushing stuff, and we found with both these characters, Snail and Whale, you know, it was always kind of less is more. It felt like, and there's such beautiful moments that are just, you know, that are just them experiencing stuff together. So they're not like, they don't have to be doing a bit of business, you know. It's like, it is about them being in a space and experiencing the world together, and observing things and enjoying things, you know, so, or being scared together, or whatever it is. So yeah, so it takes a lot, but it takes a lot of uh, uh, I think courage for an animator to kind of relinquish that, to the other teams. It's almost like usually I have to be doing something. That's what's going to be interesting. you yeah. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, I wanted to add something to like just unifying the look and the world and the characters, making everything fit together. One of the luxuries and opportunities we have from doing an adaptation is that we already know, like, generally the direction of the characters, right? So on our films, we don't do a whole lot of explorative design or inspirational design that then ends up in the bin. Pretty much we're working from the start. Like, we know the snail is going to be in there. This is how she looks in the illustrations. This is how she looks in the boards. They have to do such and such thing. But it allows us to really involve all the steps that come after the drawing into the process of the design. So the modeling, the surfacing becomes part of the design, because we're very sure that we're going to have this character on screen and she is going to look like that, right? Like, we know what the direction is. And it's, to us, it's always very important to have such an approach, because it really allows for all the departments to feed into that. Like, we don't have to get everything across in one drawing. We know there's going to be a master modeler going to take these these sketches and turn them into a nice model. And then we have these fantastic surface artists who also add to the design. Like, when you see our sketches, they often seem a bit simple, but we know what's going to come afterwards. I often compare it a little bit to, like, Muppets, for example. If you see the drawing of a Muppet, it doesn't look like much, but it's all the surfacing and the feel of these characters that make the designs work. And that's I think, a big part of how these things then fit together, because everything is built kind of level by level, almost at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Max. I think, like, because we're also trying to, again, think almost like if we were to be doing this with model sets or model characters as we would in stop motion, the intention is to get everything into 3D as soon as we have a clear idea of what we want, and then to work it there, as opposed to putting that off. And it really gets, I mean, and I think that kind of is the same way that we like to approach the filmmaking. We like to sort of get into previews quickly. On this film specifically, we also tried to get a lot of the questions, because we knew that VFX were going to have a lot of a big task ahead of us. We worked with VFX at a previous stage to say, well, what are the things that you guys are worried about? And they said, well, we're really worried about whale moving too fast, because if whale moves too fast in our simulations, it's going to, everything's going to kind of explode at the speed of light if you have whale popping. And so even at a previous phase, we had like a dummy whale that would move through the shots at pretty much like we knew how fast a natural whale would move, and that was like our speed limit. And that was set to us by the VFX department. So we really tried to kind of take quite a holistic approach to all these different layers of information that different departments needed. Let's see if I can. I don't think I've got anything on that specifically.
But it's also it's the visuals as well, like the water, the lighting, everything, the camera, everything informs each other so much. And I think, again, that where really Sara was so crucial to the whole process is this, like, knowing all these things in advance and how they would fit together later. On our previous films, we had a lot of still cameras, or even if they were moving, there were a lot of things we could still fix in compositing. We could change the whole lighting setup in a scene if we wanted to. And sometimes you rely on that too much. But we knew that would not be possible once we have the water involved, because like you can't just change the matte painting of the sky if you've rendered a whole ocean underneath. That's all, like it's all working together. So it was really important to factor all these things in. If you shine the light on an ocean in this angle, and then you have the camera in a specific other angle, it looks completely different. It has completely different colors. The same ocean. I mean, Sarah, you can probably talk about that. I think you figured it out because we were not aware of that when it started.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know about that, but I think what was a big game changer on this project was sort of the implementation of base lighting quite earlier on. Usually we'd animate a shot, get into set dressing, and then only once it's through that, then put it into lighting, look at the color keys, and then the lighters would sort of draw inspiration from there. But our lighting lead, Armand Formata, did quite a simple task, but he set up base lights for each sequence before we properly started getting going. And I think it just really helped us see everything in context and sort of make decisions based off that, and make decisions sort of know what's might not be seen in camera, and not spend time there and not spend our resources there. Or if we're only going to see a certain thing in a certain lighting situation, then that's sort of we kind of build our sets and our characters according to that, the characters that are seen in those situations. And so I think that was incredibly helpful, just seeing things in context as early as possible. And another sort of kudos to Armand, because he really lent into using lighting as a storytelling tool in this film, and he really wanted to explore that as much as possible early on. And what was great about that is it gave so much information to all of the departments. I think the animators found use out of that, the set dressing team found use out of that, the shading department would shade things according to certain lighting setups, and it was not only very time efficient, but ultimately, all the information came in early, which was helpful for everyone.
And I feel like that must be rewarding for the artists as well. Compared to when I work on feature films, I feel like maybe 10% of all the art and assets and things that are produced early on make it onto screen. For our films, it's almost the opposite. I feel like 90% of the things we make are actually in the film. We're wasting very, very little resources on changing our mind or changing the trajectory.
Do you feel like that's because the story is already set, because the character is already more or less there? Or I guess with that knowledge, what would you bring to the feature world? What would you tell your feature animation counterparts to how they can be more efficient?
It's tricky because they are different products, right? And it definitely helps if you have a illustrated book that you kind of trying to stay true to. But at the same time, we also work quite hard on the animatics early on. And by the time we go into production, we have a solid animatic that we can rely on. We still work on it. We change the story, we craft the story as we get more information, as we see how a camera moves in previs. All these things factor into these things. But it's by the time we really launch into production, we are very, very certain that we actually will need this down the line. We're not going to throw it away. If we would do that, our films wouldn't be able to look this good. Like we invest everything into the things that are on camera. And as Sara was mentioning, some sets are really modeled for the camera. There's not much beyond that. Like you see what you see. We're not building a whole 3-dimensional set for everything. Often it's really just all the detail is in the foreground, and it's much more approached like a painting, I would say, like, because we know we're not going to move the camera to that angle. We're going to stay here. Other sets, like the dock, for example, we knew we would explore this rock from all angles and very close and very far, and there was water around. It became one of our most challenging sets, funny enough, because we had to get so close into it, and at the same time there was not that much to work from. Like, we really had to rely on our surface department, I feel like, to make that work, because often it's just a black surface, which is very, very hard to light then in addition, because it either blows out or it's completely, all the detail goes away.
Absolutely. We had a high tide version and a low tide version as well, where it had to work. It had to work from all these different angles, and it also had to work for the two different scenarios when the first part where Snail's sort of off on a mission, and then the second part where whale arrives. And in the book, it's like that there's a sort of it changes completely. Sorry, Sarah, you were going to say?
Oh no, I was just going to say another good example of that was, I think, in one of the tropical scenes or one of the tropical shots, when we only really see this one camera from a certain angle. And in the book, I think it's actually a little snapshot from the book almost. And
you bring that up.
And we had a monkey. There he is.
It's this one, right?
It's this one, yeah. We had this monkey that he only features in this one shot. And so you know, we also had to kind of find economies where we could, because this was such a VFX heavy film, and sort of so much focus was kind of revolving around that. So this guy, I mean, I think he was modeled in pose. He couldn't do too much more than, I think, rotate his head and maybe wiggle his tail. But it served its purpose, you know, and it looks great on screen. But that was it. I mean,
he's like one of the old Disney. He's like one of the Disneyland, you know, those old Disneyland
Jungle
attractions,
Book.
you know. Yeah, the Jungle Ride. It's just, you know, you can do that. Say his
he's
thing,
staying
and
on
then
that
you
tree
move.
for life.
Then you move right past him, and then you're on to the next attraction.
Yeah.
And just also going back to the rock, I think that's an interesting example of where we slightly divert from the book. Like on the book, she's kind of around she's at the dock, but she's kind of always changing position, and there's not one key rock that it feels like home. And that's one of these like things that we subtly change in the story. So it's always the same rock, and it's always the same snails, and then just it's subtle things like, but when you're storytelling wise, the other snails are usually on the back of the rock. They don't care that much about looking out into the distance and the ocean, and they hardly move, while the little snail is always at the top of the rock trying to look far out into the world. So like in terms of the adaptations, all these things then also play into that. But that also added a few more challenges, because in the book, the staging is always like, however the illustrations needed. Oh, there's the rock is right here, and there's the rock right there. And there was a whole thing going on, and like, how deep does the dock have to be? So, and how high has the water, can the water come so the whale is actually able to swim up to the rock? And it's all these challenges. You can only figure that out really once you start previs. So that's where we also we really try to involve all the departments in the storytelling and figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, the book also doesn't tell us. Yeah, it is. It's just sheer. We also had no idea about how close this dock was to the town or anything like that, and so we had to, in kind of creating the 360 version of the world, we had to build a town pretty much for only like a couple of shots. Like I think there's like 3 shots or something where you see it.
Speaking of the town, I was curious. Well, for this town, and then for the other where the shore where the whale gets capsized.
Yes.
where, what were the locations inspired by?
This is an excellent question as well.
Because
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Max. No, you go.
Well, again, it's another great example of where we divert from the book sometimes. You know, here you see the illustration from the book, and the school is right there, and that works perfectly for the illustration because you have to fit everything on one page. But for us, we knew that would become a problem in the story because what the children would be out at play. They would definitely see the whale. It's not believable that you don't spot that whale if your school is right there. And so one of the things we did there was we created this huge dune, right? That is between the school and the beach, which also, in addition to like blocking the side of the kids, would be another great obstacle for a snail to overcome. So sometimes these things work in tandem and in favor of the storytelling. But yeah, and that's a great example where we kind of divert from the book a little to make it work in the medium that we are telling our story in.
Yeah, and just in terms of the where we drew inspiration for this school, I think like that there was a lot of internal talk about like, well, the class size is very small. This must be quite a small. It's either a very small community or a very wealthy community that can afford this. But we didn't want them to feel too posh, so we went, well, it's a small community school, and it has a bit of a. We wanted, I mean, this is all we have to work with from the book. There's a shot inside the classroom, and it's sort of that wonderful thing that an illustrator can do where it's white so that there's space for the text. And so our production designer, Dan Clark, had to really kind of think about, well, here are the characters, but what's inside that classroom, and how busy to make it, how full. And I think the idea was to just try to make it feel a little bit timeless. So there's no, there's no what do you call it, smartboard.
No iPads.
They're not all on iPads. I think that in all of Axel's illustrations, there is a sort of timeless quality. There was an enormous debate about how they were going to phone the firemen. Should they find a phone box, or should they just use a cell phone? In the end, we thought it's more dramatic to have the whale in the background. Let's just use the cell phone. And also, will kids even know what a phone box is? Maybe that's a new form of timelessness. But yeah.
But looking at these illustrations and then thinking back at the board, it's another great example how the staging and the sets evolve. Like, for example, how the tables, the desks are arranged. That changed quite a bit. Like in the boards, it was a bit more like in the book, I think. And then here, Dan already shifted it a bit around because it felt little bit strange, the way we boarded it. But then once you put it into 3D, it felt even weirder to have these tables just randomly set in this room. And I think we then felt like, well, they should probably, if there's just these 6 kids, they would already more probably more like sit together at like an arrangement, and that felt more natural. But those are kind of things like that just happens. Like we're not trying to anticipate all these things. What we know is there's going to be this classroom. So the classroom itself has to be good, but then we're still open to figuring things out as the other departments join, because that's just a very organic way of working.
Yeah.
One thing I was curious about was, did you guys consider frame rate? I know that's something that I've seen in some other films. Make it look more, I guess, like stop motion or anything like that. Or what did you guys determine that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you so a lot of Snail and the Whale is a mixture of 12 frames per second and 24 or 25 frames per second. Since Room on the Broom, I believe, Max, that was the first show that you guys worked on twos. I think we've always sort of thought that, yeah, working on twos with very little or limited motion blur really does give you that nice stop motion effect. And it allows you to kind of see the kind of graphic quality of the poses for a bit longer, and it kind of helps it feel a bit more like a moving illustration. You know, I think sometimes when you see really beautiful polished animation that has like super lots of overlap and lots of different arcs and everything, when it comes to a stop, you know, things are kind of all kind of stopping on different layers and everything. It can kind of, it's amazing to look at, but it definitely doesn't feel like stop motion. It feels like CGI, and for us to kind of really sell this idea that we're in these kind of these little miniature worlds, it felt like we wanted to really embrace the same limitations you would get in stop motion. Having said that, there are some things that even in stop motion you have to go to ones for, which is moving cameras, or else you get horrible strobing. And I think that we looked into what our water effects might look like if we tried to kind of, what we would have to do is we'd have to simulate everything on ones and then cut out frames so that it would be on twos. But what you very soon kind of realize is that so much of what allows the effect to feel like water, it's to do with the motion blur, and it's to do with the direction that things are going. And so we did experiment a little bit initially with using stop motion as a kind of jump off point, but I think, again, to Sarah's point, it just kind of really defeated a lot of the sense of scale and the size of the world. So yeah, so it was a constant debate about whether we're going to do this shot. Is this character on twos or ones? And if we want to go to ones, why are we going to ones? And we tried to keep it on twos as much as possible.
In my memory, it felt like the most of the film is on twos. But I guess you guys were just selective.
Very much so, yeah. And I think you'd be right about that. I mean, most of the shots with the kids, all the human characters, unless the camera's moving, it's on twos. And we also combine things. So sometimes, you know, there are shots where the tail is moving and Snail is on the tail. And the tail is on ones because it has to move with the camera and move with the water. But then Snail will be on twos. So it'll, you know, you'll move the tail, and then you'll move the character, and then you'll move it for 2 frames, and you'll move the character, and you get this nice kind of hybrid look, which we hope is not jarring to you. We hope it actually.
No, I was gonna say it felt very natural to me, but
awesome.
I didn't notice any.
I remember when we started doing this on Room on the Broom, we originally thought we would save money by doing it because our budget had just been cut, and we were looking for all the kind of opportunities to save a little bit here and there. And one of our animators came up with the idea to do it in twos. It turned out to be much more challenging than doing it on ones, because it's a whole different workflow. A lot of CG animators are using curves, which is much harder to do if you work on twos, because you almost have to craft every pose for every frame you're using it. It's, can rely much less on interpolation and just pulling your curves to make a small adjustment. Became much more complicated. But as Dan said, we also noticed that it did something great for these characters that are surfaced, like stop motion characters. It made them feel more tactile, and that's why it kept doing it. But yeah, it's
So it did the opposite of save money.
Yes.
It exposes, as an animator working on some of these shows, it's like exposes all your weaknesses, right? All your bag of tricks that you had, you have to throw it out, and you have to really know how to pose something properly, and you have to be so deliberate with your spacing. And the computer gives you very little help. You have to be the one to say, it's this much. It's between here and here. So yeah, it's a real boot camp for the animation team. It's but I think everyone who kind of wrestles with that, on the other side, they always are happy, you know, that they did wrestle with it, because they feel that it's given them a different eye, which is cool.
Is it more true to traditional animation? Would you say?
I would say so, yeah, because I think that originally, because you used to have to do all your in-betweens, right, manually, they would do whatever they could on twos. And if you look at the animes, they go even lower if they can, and they find great ways of timing something out on threes even, or you know, and 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 if they're successful, it still works. It doesn't really pull you out of the moment. It's really fascinating. But that thinking about the economy of frames, because of course, back in those days, it was anything you draw has to be cleaned up by someone, has to be painted by somebody, we have to buy celluloid.
Yeah,
it's all expensive. So try not to draw anything if you don't have to. Yeah, but it's nice to think like that as a CG animator. It makes you not take anything for granted, I think.
It's also one of the things I really love about animation and that approach to filmmaking in general. It's a magic trick, you know.
Yes,
absolutely. Whenever we can cheat something, I love to go for the cheat. And yeah, okay, let's only build it for this frame. Let's only do this and that, and try to get away with it, because it's really one of these things where it's like, but it works. That's the magic. It's just drawings on a paper. It's just polygons. But it comes to life, and then it's part of the magic trick. If you can just do everything over and over again, and you polish it, that's cool too, and you get a completely different thing. But for me, the cheating is a bit part of the fascination. Yeah.
You guys have done so many books, so many adaptations of Julia's books. It sounds like there's more adaptations on the way. Like, how has that relationship evolved?
I would say it actually started with her being more involved during the Gruffalo, because we had to build the trust. And she was actually one of the writers on the Gruffalo too. And the more it progressed, I feel like the more distance has come between us, because I think there's just a lot of trust involved from her side. But she still sees all the animatics, and she comments on the script, and she comments on work in progress. Same as Axel. So they are involved in the process, and but we ourselves don't know it too well. It's mostly handled by the production company Magic Light Pictures.
We get to kind of experience sort of her take on what we've done. Sort of at the end, there's usually a screening for the team, and she is often there. And so far she's been pretty happy with the stuff. She has very nice things to say about the movies. So we're very grateful that she gives us that trust, and we hope we can continue to make her and Axel feel like we're doing justice to their books.
And even with you and Max, how did you guys come together to start co-direct?
Do you want to tell the story, Max, or shall I?
you initiated it, I think. Then I'll maybe add my side.
Love at first sight.
Yeah.
We when I got the job to co-direct Stickman, I shot Max an email, because Magilai said, "Oh, Max, ask Max anything. Max is free to you guys if you want to." Because Max had actually written the script for Stickman, the initial script, and so I wrote to Max and I asked him some questions. And I said, one of the questions I asked him was, "Do you have any advice for me being a co-director? I've never been a co-director before." And he said, "Oh yeah. Just make sure you don't tell the crew something that contradicts what the other guy said." And I was like, that's pretty sound advice.
Yeah.
and it's harder than it at the time. I thought, well, that's going to be easy, and then it turned out to be quite hard, because I was working with a director who was based in London, and we were just starting to get our heads around this kind of Skypey virtual virtual directing or virtual working thing that is now so common. I mean, I remember, I'm going to go off on a tangent about Skype, but essentially, then Max and I, when we made Stickman, we made Revolting Rhymes, and my wife and I were on a bit of a trip around the States, and I messaged Max just to say, hey, well, I'm in Los Angeles for just a couple of days. Are you around? And we met up and had lunch together in Burbank, I think, and we hit it off. And because we both worked on Revolting Rhymes, but had never met. We talked about that, and we talked about the other shows and our mutual friends that we now had, and then it was about a week later that I got a call from Magic Light saying, "Hey, would you think you might want to do a movie with Max? We want to set up Zog at Triggerfish with Max, and would you like to co-direct it with him?" And so it was like a blind date that I didn't know was a blind date, and we got along so well. I just thought that sounds like a lot of fun. And my memory is that when I got back to South Africa and we started sort of having a first pass at the thumbnail boards together, we kind of quickly realized that we both had very similar sensibilities in terms of comedy and entertainment and appeal, and Max had done a really good script, and so it was very clear to me what the intention was in terms of the emotion of that movie, and it was actually pretty easy. Like it was kind of like strangely easy, right? Like
it was funny how it worked out, because prior to this I had co-directed with Jan Lachauer and co-directed with Jacob Schuh, who I both kind of studied with, and we were already close friends when we jumped into directing together. And then Jacob and Jan directed Revolting Rhymes, and so they had already told me great things about Dan, and it was speaking in very high terms of him. And previously to that, the two of us had only like Skyped once or so. And then when we had this script for Zog, and we already had the script for The Snail and the Whale. And I was talking to Magic Light, like, how could we do it? And coincidentally, at that time, Dan sent me an email saying like, hey, I'm in Los Angeles. Would you want to meet up? And it's like, yes, let's do that. Maybe this is kind of meant to be. And it turned out to really work out. We had that lunch, and then I was like, I think this is going to be great. And let's try to do it. And as he said, I think the key to co-directing is that you talk among the two of you first, develop like a vision together, and that way that it sets you up really well, that you know what is important in every shot, and why is every shot in the movie, what does it need to accomplish, so you don't tell the team different things.
I think part of what I've also learned in the process is that if we do tell them different things, is to own up very, very quickly.
It does happen, yeah.
Because it does happen. I mean, there's just so much information, right, that goes into making one of these things, and it's the same. I mean, it's the same between departments, and it's the same with your leads. Sometimes they want to try something a certain way, and you've told them the artist something else, and you didn't know that's what the lead wanted to do, and you just have to kind of have to be open to being wrong sometimes, and sort of say mea culpa, and try to get everyone back on the same page as quickly as possible without it turning into a unhappy situation.
How do you guys split up the duties as co-directors? How do you decide what is it like you take certain scenes and other people take certain scenes, or like
we spoke about that initially. Max, you were reminding me the other day that initially the idea was on Zog that you might not have time to see the project all the way through to the end, and there was this idea that maybe we would start pre-production together, and at some point Max would hand off. But I think we both enjoyed the process so much, and we enjoyed talking about everything so much. And Max, we just decided at some point, hey, let's just do everything, and we'll talk to each other, and we'll make sure that we are ready for them when they have their questions. And that's kind of been our approach, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, we don't really split it up too much into tasks. I would say, obviously, I'm based in Los Angeles, so my whole experience very remote throughout most of the production. I've only made it to South Africa once for a week. So Dan is the man on the ground, and he's like, there's obviously a split in terms of tasks there because he's really at the studio answering all the questions that come in all the time. But what we found really important is that we would always, like, every day I would get up really early and we would talk for like 2 hours, either just the two of us or the team. It was kind of an open door policy. Whenever someone had a question, or we would have given contradictory notes before someone would go off and implement them, they would come and talk to us and we could figure it out on the fly. But so I think our approach is much more the like 4 eyes see better than 2. So we look at everything together and try not to contradict ourselves. And if there's something, we figure it out. And yeah, we don't really split up scenes or tasks or anything. It's just
yeah. And to bolt on to that, the secret of getting everything done on the ground is delegation, and that's where Sara came in. So it's 4 eyes plus 2 more eyes, and then the other leads. We add all their eyes into the mix. I think like I think that there were certain things on this project that kind of we knew were going to be tough, and then they were tough, and Sara really picked up the ball, and when there were a couple of curveballs, she kind of she was Sara ended up like rebuilding the whole edit of the film at some point for us. and getting really heavily involved with the VFX team, because that required a lot of a constant attention and a constant conversation. Yes.
But I think like the team was so determined to make the most beautiful film possible. I think sort of despite, or maybe even because of the challenges and how ambitious a film it was, so we didn't really try and take too many shortcuts. There were obviously places where we tried to economize, but especially with the VFX, it was such a crucial part of the story, and it really supported the whole film. So yeah, it was really amazing. I mean, the team at Triggerfish were outstanding, and a lot of the leads were doing it for the first time, which was amazing to see them kind of like all rise to the occasion and really just give it their all.
That's true. Yeah. A lot of first time leads, first time
first time for me. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So Max was in LA and you guys were in South Africa. Was there any other sort of people working remotely, or sort of, can you just go over that process a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
We had a couple of people remotely, but I would say the majority was at Triggerfish in Cape Town, right? Like there were a few animators who were remotely.
It was just Raf and there was Casey, but she was actually in Johannesburg. So I think, I'm trying to think if there was anyone else, but I think I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure those are the only ones.
Yeah, I think that's all. And Casey would come down to Cape Town every now and then anyway, for a month here and there. So yeah, we were all pretty much in Cape Town except for Max. But he was waking up at 4 a.m. every morning to chat to the team, and everyone was always in constant awe of that, because I mean, 4 a.m. is no easy feat.
No.
And you're so on top of things, and you're so like, you know, you knew what you wanted at that time, which is incredible. So
most of the time it was 5, but sometimes 4 if it was
okay,
really,
okay.
it was just a long session.
You got to sleep in sometimes.
Yeah. It's all right, you know, once you make that your rhythm and your habit, it becomes easier. I find it much easier to get up every day at 5 than that one day if you're used to sleeping in.
Yeah.
So it was fine. It was it's just really, really crucial, I think, when you work remote, that you talk every day. I think it's one of my big convictions. It's so easy not to do that. And it's so easy to say, well, there's nothing really to talk about today. Let's just, I'm sleeping in, and you go about your day. We're not having that meeting. But especially when you're remote, I think it's so important that you talk to the other person. And luckily we have video chats now, so it feels even more in person. It's so easy to forget that when you're just writing emails or using Shotgun for your reviews, that there's another person sitting there on both ends, and that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And by having these meetings every day, you also remove that threshold that makes it so sometimes hard to call a meeting, because if you only call a meeting when there's a problem, everyone associates having a meeting with a problem. And so it becomes like, oh, should I even call them? And people get hesitant about that. But if it's just kind of normal and we're all talking and everyone's just coming in and out, it becomes much more of a back and forth and a conversation. And that's another thing
that's great advice.
We deeply believe in terms of directing. Is directing is especially on this kind of level where we ultimately have a low budget, and you always have to set priorities. Even on the big picture, big feature films, you have to set priorities. And I feel like that only if you have all the information from the team, you can actually set the right priorities, because we might ask for something and think it's easy, but it actually involves oh, now we have to go back and rework this for 3 weeks, and this might have an impact on our decision because we didn't have all the information. So encouraging the team to speaking up and giving us all the information and letting us know if they have concerns, opposed to just going off and trying blindly to fulfill any of our requests, it actually makes our job easier, and it gives us better results because we have all the information to make the right decisions and prioritize correctly.
I know that these films are being played around Christmas time. Now, was there a very tight deadline for you guys, or what was the flexibility in terms of time?
It's pretty. As the expression says, when Christmas is coming, right? So,
you can't postpone Christmas, unfortunately.
So time is fixed, and I think whenever we did run into anything that we needed to put more attention on, it was usually a case of putting more people on the team as opposed to trying to push out the delivery. I think we should mention, so the Triggerfish team, the ones who did most of the image were based in South Africa, but Magic Light Pictures is based in the UK, and all the post-production was handled in the UK. So all the sound, music, mix, the grade, and titles and that kind of stuff, that was done in the UK at a couple of different shops.
Yeah, so we basically have to finish the film kind of with enough time for them to put on the final touches. So there was quite a hard deadline in that sense, because they need about a month and a half for that at least.
I would say
you don't realize. Go ahead, Max.
No, it's just there was also with Snail. I feel like there was this whole additional thing that Triggerfish had a feature in the pipeline, and that they've been developing for years, and that was coming. And originally, it was even meant to start sooner, and we wouldn't be able to make Snail at all at Triggerfish because there was no time. Luckily, The feature got pushed out a bit for scheduling purposes that we had nothing to do with, but it allowed us to fit Snail right in there. It was the only way to make this because we knew we needed the experience of the team, and we wanted to really make it a triggerfish. I don't think it would have been possible at any other studio. And so it led to Snail and Zog, which was the film we were directing at that time, kind of overlapping for 6 months. A lot of our leads that we had on Zog would move on to the feature and for pre-production and prepping this. So we were promoting a whole new set of leads, which turned out to be a real blessing, as Dan and Sara already touched on, because everyone was really eager to prove themselves and had new ideas and came with all this momentum and energy. But so at the same time, whenever someone was finished, they would move on to onto the feature film, and it was very, very hard to get them back. So even within the departments, I remember there were all these deadlines, like, no, sets are built, all your sets builders are gone to the feature. That even internally led to a lot of these micro deadlines that we had to hit.
Yeah, they kept us on a short leash.
I had read that the actress Sally, the voice of the snail, you guys had worked with her before, and you guys knew that you wanted to have her on the project. I was just curious if that was like a decision that had to be made.
No, but the decision that had to be made was like the narrator's voice doesn't have any generic text in the book. And so we were debating, should it be a male voice or a female voice? And in the end, we did settle for Diana Rigg, because we felt like we needed a female voice with gravitas. A male voice would have competed too much with Rob Brydon's performance of the whale. And yet you needed that gravitas that like that documentaries have, like nature documentaries, and we wanted that kind of a voice, and Diana had all that. So that was a big part where we would lean into the female voice for those reasons.
Yeah, so someone who has authority but also warmth and a bit of a twinkle in the eye, but could also do the drama at the drop of a hat. I mean, she was a wonderful actress, and we were very privileged to get the chance to work with her.
And as directors, are you, because one of you is you guys are so far apart, how did you work with, or how did you direct the voice actors?
You go ahead.
So originally, we had been put into parallel studios, right? And on Zog we did this. That you get studios who are linked up. I forget what the technology is called, but it's basically an almost real-time link, and it's very expensive, and and you feel like a proper director. You get a big plush seat, and they order you lunch or breakfast or whatever, and it's fantastic. But eventually, we figured out that because in the studios. There isn't too much difference between doing that and doing a kind of what we're doing right now, because you can hear the audio very well. We kind of were able to sort of start using some less expensive technology and communicate with the actors that way, and it worked really well. It worked really well for me, because I would have gotten really starstruck on a couple of occasions. And then talking in this way, you're able to be very professional, and you're able to be very, what do you call it, candid with your feedback, because you're sort of you have
protected
this,
by a screen.
Well, you see them like you always see them. There's a famous person on the screen. There's nothing weird about that. Yeah. Famous person in real life. That's very strange.
And I would say a lot of credit also goes to our producers, Michael Rose and Martin Pope, who are in London and who would be in the booth with the actors and like establishing the connection and the relationship. And they would do most of the voice directing, with us feeding in them. That I do think that really helps. Like if you have someone locally and who can just establish a personal connection to the actors, and I think everyone is always grateful for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, you guys, I've read that you guys are both come from a traditional 2D animation background. If this film were done in a traditional 2D animation, what would you do differently, if anything?
That's a really interesting question. I've never really considered that. What do you reckon, Max?
Well, I know that originally, like with the Gruffalo, we were talking a lot about like, should we do it in 2D? Should we try to adapt these illustrations more literally, like they are in the book? But the major challenge with that was that if you try to do it too literally, it brings up the differences too much, and all these changes you have to do to actually make it into a traditional animated films. Like, for example, the illustrations are actually quite rich in terms of the textures, and even with today's technology, you would have to flatten it out to some kind of extent. Then all the liberties that Axel takes, like, yeah, when you read a book, and that's the big advantage of illustrations, is like it feels like the same character, but if you look at it from with the eye of a traditional 2D animator, you see that, well, the whale is off model on every page. There is no model, really. Like, he takes liberties in terms of scale and proportions and size. So you would have to settle on one version of that whale that wouldn't do justice to every page, every illustration that's on the page. Like, it would automatically contradict some illustrations, by taking it into another medium in another dimension, we're kind of circumventing that. Like, we're removing it enough so it always feels like it's very, very true to these illustrations. So doing it in 2D was not really a consideration, I think, just because of that, because we wanted to find a way that expands the world and where we can add to it, but also stay really true to the illustrations.
But when you asked me the question, I thought of Monstro and Pinocchio and how they did him, and I can't imagine doing a whole film with that amount of because they did so much, very fine micro, almost like airbrushing to do those effects, like the spray and all that kind of stuff. So yes, I would have to. It would definitely be a serious undertaking, right, to do it in 2D. Wow.
In terms of the length of the film, was there any restriction on that, or how did you guys determine the final length, I guess?
Well, we have quite a generous time window. I think it's between 24 and 30 minutes, anything is possible. So, which allows us to really craft the story first. And how we usually work is that we edit the animatic ourselves, and we do most of the board ourselves, and we build the film how we see it. And then once we have a final image, or close to a final image, we bring in our editor, Robin Sayers, who looks at it more from a live action editor's point of view, and he really helps us shape the story again. And here and there we lose a few seconds or a shot here and there, which is always sad, but overall we're just crafting the flow of the film at that point. And so that sometimes shaves off a minute, I would say, just to make it all work nicely together. But we're never cutting it down to a certain length or something. It's just like, oh, this is usually we're a bit over time, and because we produce a bit more handles on each shot, and some safety coverage here and there, but not too much. And so we just cut whatever feels right for the film, I think. Yeah.
Sure. what did you guys learn from this film that you plan to take knowledge-wise to your future films?
Sarah, that's a good question for you.
Yeah.
I think try and view things as much in context as possible from as early on as possible. So if you can get sort of a solid base lighting in to even layout or previs stage, it's going to inform so much later down the line. You're not going to waste time building unnecessary things. You're not going to waste time texturing or adding detail to things that are going to be in shadow. Animators are going to be kind of more aware of, if there's shadows or things that are sort of going to obstruct the performance, that all that information is there up front. And so I think with the film that we're doing now, we're really trying to lean into that and just get as much of that sort of information up front so that it makes everyone else's lives a little bit easier down the line.
So is that, I mean, this is kind of a technical question. So in order to do that, are you, like, as soon as you get the boards, are you trying to build it in layout and surface it and light it right away, or is
no, not surface it right away, but we'll do like quite a basic layout based off the boards and the initial sort of concept sketches, and then at least on our project now, our art director has now started doing all the color keys that are kind of informing the moods of the different sequences and the times of day and the tone of that, and so then based off those, our lighting supervisor is setting up quite basic base lights based off those can then be imported into the layout and then sort of trickle down, and things can be built according to the information that lighting rig gives us.
And I think in terms of the pipeline, the workflow, one of the things that we do different is that we really try to elevate the whole film at each stage. Like, we're not going off and doing one sequence and getting it all the way done while we're still working on another sequence. We really try to, like, okay, we have the boards, we know some things are going to change, but we try to then do previews for the whole film. We try to do color keys for the whole film, so we can see everything in context all the time. And I like to compare it to, like, when you do a drawing or a sketch. You don't start in one corner of the image and do the sketch and clean it up and add all the detail and then move on to to the next corner. It's like, so we're approaching it more like that, like a drawing that you build in layers, but you always have the complete image, at least as a vision there.
Yeah. I think that what I've kind of taken away from this film and the last film, working with Max, and kind of learning from his approach to directing, is finding a really good balance about having as much good information for the team up front as possible. So anything that you do know that you want and that you have like a good reference for it or a good touchstone for it, to just provide it and to be very clear about that. But then also to create enough space for people to bring their ideas and to bring, their own personal touch to the film. I think that that always looking for that balance, to take a responsibility for for a lot of crucial stuff as a director, but then also invite other people to take responsibility. I think that's what I've learned from Max. I think that's and I'll always try to replicate that in whatever else I do.
It's the beauty of animation, that you create something that's bigger than the sum of all the individual parts. And it's something you always work with people, or ideally, let's say ideally you work with people, and in our case it has been like that, that are better at each of the tasks. Like, they are masters at each task. So you want to rely on their input and their information, and you want to build that into the pipeline. You want to allow for time for that, ideally, if you have the time.
But I think the thing that allows those people to do their best work, though, is also having enough, like you were saying, having enough information up front. Hey, it's like, so I think that we were talking a little bit earlier about, well, where do you find economy? And I've worked on projects where because I've directed, but I've also been directing quite a bit, and I've worked on projects where the approach is much more exploratory. It's kind of like, it could be anything, you know. Let's go and find out together, and that's exciting initially, but it does get frustrating after a while if you do spend a lot of your resources exploring, and then the thing that you end up with is maybe there's still uncertainty about it. I don't know that, you know. So yeah, so I think that's it for me. It's like trying to figure out what you do know, and trying to be honest about what you don't know, and invite people to make up that the rest of the picture with you.
I agree, and I think possibly what I've learned on this film is that you could take it even further. I remember this moment when we had the title sequence for the film. For the longest time, it was just boards, and we always had in our mind, yeah, at some point we'll have the set built, and then we'll just scout it. And the result of that, like what Alex did, was just amazing. Like, just because we had the lights set and we had the set built, and this was a three-dimensional set that we already knew we would explore quite a bit with the camera. It allowed us to find so many great angles, and in the light, it's much more of a documentary or live action approach. It's just like finding these images that are already there.
Yeah.
Like,
it's almost like B-roll.
Yeah,
it's like really good B-roll.
And I would love to find a way to implement that in future projects, like have a bit more B-roll, and then allow for editorial to have these little things that make it even more organic, I think. Yeah.
Great. So on that note, what are some things that you guys are working on now? What are some things you guys are excited about?
Sara, you again.
Go first.
You go first.
Well, I mean, I'm very lucky. I'm you know, thanks to these guys, I think a lot of thanks to these guys, I'm directing my first one of these along with Jack Hamman, who was a animation supervisor on Zog, and most recently the sequel to Zog. And yeah, so we're busy with that at the moment. We're both based in Cape Town, and we're also doing the remote setup, but now we're making it in London with Blue Zoo over there. So I'm very excited about that. The experience so far has been fantastic. It's been a lot of fun. You know, we've just done our first few voice recording sessions with the cast. And so, I mean, all these new kind of experiences have been incredible because, you know, this is probably my 6th one of these films, but I'm seeing so many different sides of it that I, you know, have never seen before. So yeah, that's what I'm really excited about at the moment.
And
how about you guys?
That's coming out in this Christmas, correct?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's all your own merit. Not much to do with us at all. I'm actually working for Magic Light as well. I'm developing some projects with them, and too early to say what they are, but it's been great. I've been having a good time with that, and then I've also got a feature film in development at Triggerfish. And we're still sort of at scripting stage with that one. It's quite a tough one to crack. It's based on a graphic novel that Sara and I were both involved with, helping kind of with the story and kickstarting a couple of years ago. So yeah, but hopefully we get that off the ground. It's based on local Zimbabwean mythology and history.
Interesting.
Yeah. For me, it's a bit like I had been dreaming for so long to make Snail in the Whale, and it's always so I've always kind of figured after that I would stop a little bit with short films for a while. There are some projects that I'm developing that I can't talk about yet, but mostly is that me and my wife, we make picture books together, so I'm trying to focus on telling our own little stories, and that's been going pretty well so far. So I'm doing that, and I'm also working as a storyboard artist at different feature film studios around.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you guys joining me today and giving us all this wonderful insight. Thanks again for talking to us, and yeah, I really look forward to seeing you guys' future projects, and fingers crossed for Snail and the Whale getting that Oscar nomination.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Ben. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.